KDPG Sunday edition, we're talking what else impeachment with two experts who just happen to be at Duquesne University right here in Pittsburgh, President Ken Gormley and Dr. Kristen Kupe. Ken Gormley is the former law school dean. He's appeared on this program many times in that incarnation. We're delighted to have you on board as president. And Dr. Kupe has taught constitutional law. You've taught courses on impeachment. You both know the history of the process, even though it's sort of it's a small history. We've only been here a few times before. But talking in the last segment about how things could change rapidly, things that we may not foresee could happen. And in the case of the Nixon impeachment, the smoking gun, as it came to be known, the existence of recordings of the president talking about the CIA and the FBI, that was unknown to the American public and even to the people, the managers of the impeachment, until the testimony happened on live TV, correct?
Correct. Alexander Butterfield testified in Congress, and it was everyone almost, their jaws dropped visibly. No one knew about it because the whole question was whether President Nixon was telling the truth or John Dean, who had said that he was part of the cover-up. Now there was evidence that could determine whether President Nixon was part of the cover-up or whether John Dean was lying. And so those tapes changed everything.
On the tapes, the president considered a payment to the burglars, correct?
Correct.
And he talked about getting the CIA involved to thwart the FBI. How quickly did that change minds, and how soon after the revelation of that tape was it that Howard Baker and the other Republican senators went to the White House and told President Nixon, it's over, you got to go?
It escalated rapidly. Once the smoking gun tape came out, plus, of course, remember the famous gap in the tapes where there was an erasure, and there was no good 18 and a half minutes, actually.
Thank you. That's why you're the scholar.
There was no explanation for it. At that point, the game was over, and you had Republicans like Barry Goldwater and some of Nixon's staunchest Republican colleagues going over and telling him they could no longer support him. So it happened very quickly, but it looked like Nixon was going to get past all of this up until we saw those tapes. He came very close to accomplishing that.
There's another impeachment we haven't talked about, Andrew Johnson. He assumed the office after the assassination of President Lincoln. Lincoln, of course, is a Republican. Johnson was a Democrat, and he defied Congress after Congress essentially dared him to, right? Yes. Talk about this, what led to his impeachment. I think that's more in your...
Sure, so I've written on this too. Yeah. Andrew Johnson, although he was a Democrat in those days, that would be the party that was against freeing the slaves, favoring the Civil War.
And he wanted to give legitimacy back to the Confederate States.
Exactly. Yes. Andrew Johnson was really, once Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, he's of the opposite party, really, of Lincoln, and he was trying to reverse the Reconstruction policies of the Congress that had passed them after Lincoln's death. So in some ways he was subverting the country as it was being put back together. Yeah. And so although the impeachment effort had to do with this convoluted Tenure of Office Act that we don't need to get into, really the nub of it was a political effort to oust him because he was trying to disrupt putting the country back together pursuant to the Reconstruction Congress.
So he came within one vote of conviction in the Senate, and he seemed to come out okay. He was later elected to the U.S. Senate. That's never happened before.
Well, let me say okay. He really died almost a broken man, though. He left office somewhat in disgrace. He did not get another term. He tried to run for Congress multiple times. He was finally elected to the Senate and then died a couple of months later. So this was not a rosy career after all this. Impeachment damaged him a lot.
I was trying to draw a parallel to Clinton, though, because Clinton did come out okay, did he not? There was a, and you could say that Nixon was rehabilitated to a certain extent.
Clinton came out okay, but I interviewed Henry Hyde, again, the person who led the impeachment drive for the House, and he told me he was very proud of their efforts because there would not have been a President George W. Bush were it not for his efforts. And there is a lot of truth to that, although Bill Clinton never agreed with that. Al Gore was damaged because of the impeachment effort. So this leads a lot of collateral damage that you can't gauge fully.
All right, let's talk about where the nuts and bolts, where the process goes from here. So Once public testimony concludes, Dr. Kupi, the House will then, we presume, vote on articles of impeachment, which are, in a sense, charges?
Essentially, and it's important to remember impeachment is a two-step process. So the House can actually impeach the president. It would then, if the articles pass, go to the Senate for the trial. And the trial is what determines removal and further barment from other federal offices.
So in the Senate, we would see these same witnesses testify all over again.
The Senate gets to make its own rules. And in the Clinton impeachment, they had very truncated rules for witnesses. You didn't see, again, Monica Lewinsky at the Senate trial. It was designed, they wanted to get done with this thing, get this off their back and move on. So one doesn't know what the Senate will decide here.
Okay. Let's just imagine there's a world in which the Republican senators will be convinced to vote to convict, or enough Republican senators, enough to convict President Trump and remove him from office. Let's say Trump holds firm to his position that this is a hoax, it's a witch hunt, it's a scam, and he refuses to abide by the Senate's decision. What would happen then?
I mean, if he is removed from office by the Senate, he needs to leave office. And there's other constitutional provisions for the replacement of a president. So we have the 25th Amendment that's put into place that says if for some reason the president is unable to serve or dies or is removed from office, then the vice president takes over. But then if we're gaming it out, that opens up a whole another can of worms as how Mike Pence will react to the whole impeachment. If he will hold firm with the Republican Party line that this is a hoax and that Donald Trump is the rightful president and this is just the Democrats' attempt to undo what happened in the 2016 election.
Well, the problem with that is if you got to the point, which is highly unlikely, that the Senate Republicans voted to remove him, that would mean the public support for that impeachment had grown to overpower their natural instinct to protect him. And at that point, everyone would jump ship. The vice president would need to step up and take this office. I think it's highly unlikely. I think it's more likely that the Senate would vote to acquit on party lines. But then the real interesting question, Ken, is what impact that has on the 2020 election. Because again, these impeachment drives impact both parties. If they overreach, it hurts them. If they try to push and protect someone improperly, that hurts them.
Well, and you've heard the Republican argument that, you know, they would agree with you. There's a very small chance, it appears, that the Senate would vote to convict the president and remove him. So the Republican argument is clearly this is being done to damage the president for 2020. Is that a legitimate complaint?
It is, but then the Republicans, all they need to do is turn around and say, look, the witch hunt, just like the Mueller report, nothing came of it. You tried to impeach the president, nothing came of it. He wasn't removed from office. This is just a concerted Democratic effort to discredit someone that they don't like, and they run it as a campaign issue.
But you know, here's the part that argument misses, and this process is working out correctly. Don't forget there was a 2018 election too, Ken. And many Democrats were added to the House because voters thought that there was no check on the White House. And so the founders put this power first in the House because it was the closest reflection to the people. And this is how it's supposed to work. And then the Senate makes a decision, and they're all politically accountable for their judgments. Yeah. It's not just the president who's accountable. All of these, so there is danger for both sides in moving forward if they overreach.
Well, and there was a reason that Speaker Pelosi was so reluctant to bring impeachment the process
She knew the history
for a while. Okay, you guys know the history of this nation far better than I do. We have just about a minute left. How concerned are you that so many Americans, more and more Americans over time, seem to be clustering in silos? You know, there's part of America that gets its news from right-leaning news sources and others from left-leaning news sources. Is that a major concern? Is it damaging to our democracy? Does it put us all in peril? What are your thoughts?
Yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. When you become so filtered by your partisan politics that you can't look to the truth of a matter, that becomes very problematic for government, for policy, all the way from local politics up to the the top position.
10 seconds for a last word.
I worry about the students that we're trying to teach and what is being modeled to them on both sides, and I hope that as a country we can get beyond that and return to the notion that we can respect each other.
Kristen Kupe, Ken Gormley, thank you both so much. We'll take
Thanks,
a break.
Ken.
Back with a final thought in just a moment.